This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Scott German. We're going to talk some UVA sports today. And, of course, the big game coming up Saturday night. I say big game. I think, Scott, it's maybe the biggest game that we've played in Charlottesville, at least since the 2011 season, the home game, the night game against Virginia Tech. And maybe even dating back, I wrote a column yesterday about the Miami game back in 2004 played in Charlottesville. But certainly a big game coming up this weekend for UVA and Miami. Wanted to get your thoughts on the game coming up Saturday night.
Well, it's certainly an opportunity for the program to take a big step forward. I know we talked about that heading into the NC State game, and I don't really, even though they lost, I'm disappointed that they were not able to come away with a victory down in Raleigh. I still think it's a positive step because before the season we wouldn't have had any hopes at all. We would have been probably laughed off the air if we would have said that Virginia should have beat State in Raleigh. So they played well. They didn't play that well, but they held their own. They didn't make a lot of silly mistakes, and they'll learn from it. But again, another opportunity Saturday night, prime time, under the lights, national spotlight. So let's hope that the team and the fans don't lay a big egg. And I say the fans because, I mean, hey, all excuses have to be left at the door for not showing up for this game. The timing is great. It's a night game, and fans can come out and tailgate all day long. The weather looks perfect. It's not going to be real humid. It'll be temperature-wise, it's going to be ideal football conditions. So great opponent coming in, nationally known opponent in Miami. If we don't top 50,000.
Yeah, it'll be
It'll probably be under that.
Yeah, and that's a sad thing. I talked about that. Yeah, I did a podcast yesterday. Talked about that a little bit too. It's, back in the day when after the stadium was first expanded to hold over 60,000 fans, I don't think we'd have ever thought there'd be a time that we'd play an ACC game in a game that Virginia was favored in, that game against Louisville a couple weeks ago, and have 34,000 people on a day when the weather was perfect. You're favored to beat an ACC team, and you see the stadium half empty. And now, unlike Virginia Tech, Miami doesn't have a big fan base. Certainly in Virginia, maybe even nationally, they can't fill their own stadium up most of the time. So it's going to take our folks getting out there. And the funny thing is, Scott, I think we could put 60,000 people in to watch a UVA basketball game. And I can't figure out. I mean, I know it's a long record of losing everything else, but now the program's on the upswing. I can't figure out why we can't get more people to come for these games. And I'm not sensing any buzz. Looking at the message boards online, I'm not sensing any buzz about, how there's going to be a huge throng of people there Saturday night. So I hope we're not disappointed, but I think we probably will be.
Well, unfortunately, I agree with you. And, I really believe that you can say all you want to say about, it's cheaper to stay at home. The TVs nowadays, and I know for a fact, because I have one, are amazing pictures. It's just, you don't have to fight the crowd. You don't have to fight the traffic. Well, that's all baloney. I think it all boils down to UVA football. And as hard as it may be to accept, we put a lousy product out on the field for a decade plus, a couple of years, and that's almost a whole generation of fans you've lost, and you may never get back. You may never. If you're looking for those people to come back, you're probably going to be looking a long time. You're going to probably have to just write them off and hope that you can start building a new fan base, and when you do that by beating teams like Miami on a Saturday night on national television. You start doing that. You don't do that by getting embarrassed on a Saturday night on national television, on the field and off the field. When I say off the field, you're a TV personality now. You can only hide the fact that there's no one in the stadium, but for so long. Every now and then there's going to be a camera stand and it's going to show vast spaces of aluminum. And unfortunately, that's not part of UVA's color scheme. So, you know, you got to put a winning product on the Virginia. You know, you don't even have to really worry about how many calls. Look at basketball product. They're great. It's one of the programs in the country. And tickets are not impossible to get. You might be lucky enough to raffle up a couple of tickets in November and December for Mary Poland and New Hope University, but the big games, they're almost impossible to get. But people still want to come. They still pay those prices. They still pay the stuff up prices. They still pay scalpers out in front of JPJ. So I really believe if you put a good product on the system, people will come back. It's just going to take a while. And this is why this is such an important game. Not only this season, we're reestablishing a fan base. It's gone. It's gone, Chris, because you talk about the Louisville game. I don't care what the announced attendance was. I was in the game, and the talk in the press box was at least 20,000 people. How many people? At a 60,000 people.
Yeah, you mentioned.
If that doesn't tell you you've lost your fan base, then I don't know what will. And hopefully, new AD is not going to sit back and take this, and is going to be very aggressive. I happen to have seen her in action a couple of times now lately. She's taken an active part. She's showed up at events that I understand would have had a hard time finding this place. So, Hilton is the sheriff. I can tell you, there is a new sheriff. And the new sheriff, and she's looking. And this is a big game for Linda the program. You can't so eloquently said, you can't mess the bed Saturday night. They have to win. Nice, but you can't get blown out by Miami. That's on a stadium as well.
Hey Scott, I'll say something here in a second, but your phone's breaking up a little bit. What I was going to say is, you mentioned I'm a TV personality now too. You know, one thing that comes to mind for me as far as our fan base and a lack of fans at games. I used to work in the pro wrestling live event business. Scott knows this too because Scott drove Mick Foley somewhere for me once, which is a fun story we'll tell one day. And Mick still keeps up with Scott. I wrote Mick Foley this huge check, and Scott gets to hang out with Mick and still knows him. But in the pro wrestling event business, all
his endeavors, which has nothing to do with wrestling, by the way.
Exactly. Yeah, Mick a great guy. Hall of Famer and everything else, and a Hall of Fame person as well. But when we worked in the pro wrestling live event business, I worked on a couple of TV shows with one company, and what we were able to do with our situation, there was one show we had where the attendance wasn't what it was supposed to be. We had a high school gym rented with 2,000 seats. We had about 600 tickets sold. So what we were able to do was we just put all 600 of those people directly across from the camera. And we didn't move the cameras around. We didn't show the end zones. We didn't have to because there's no end zones in wrestling. So we were able to make it look like there were 2,000 people in that arena. We had 600 people sitting across from the camera, and they were loud. You were not going to do that Saturday night, unfortunately, if we don't get people's butts in seats. And I fear that's going to look really, really bad on our program, but that is what it is. We got to go win this game. If we win this game and start playing the way fans, at least our age, remember. I'm not sure the young kids even have any idea that UVA football used to be relevant. I was going to quiz you on this, Scott. I wrote this column yesterday. I talked about in 2004, Virginia played Miami on a Saturday night in Charlottesville. I was at that game. I'm sure you were at that game too. I was actually in the stands that game. I didn't sit in the press box. My wife and I sat down towards the end zone, the west end zone. Virginia was ranked, and for new fans or young fans, I shouldn't say new fans, young fans who don't remember 15 years ago, we were ranked number 10 in the country, and it was legit. It wasn't the first game of the season. We were 7-1 in November. First place in the ACC playing Miami, ranked number 18 in the country, and we were favored to win the game, obviously. If you play at home as a number 10 team, you're favored to win the game. Some of the players who played in this game for Virginia, Marcus Higgins, who played in the NFL. Oh, and when I start saying that, Heath Miller, Alvin Pearman, Wally Lundy, DeBrickashaw Ferguson, Chris Long, Brandon Alberts, Brad Butler. I'm losing Ahmad Brooks, Kai Parham, Daryl Blackstock. I'm going through a long list of guys on that UVA team, and I'm not even being all-inclusive, who ended up playing in the NFL off that team. That was a good team. Miami had Frank Gore. Miami had Devin Hester, among others, on their side. They were a good team. That was an incredible game to go to. Virginia lost that game. I had a chance to win at the end. Miami scored a touchdown on fourth down to make it to put the game out of reach and won 31-21. I ran some numbers, Scott, because even at the time I thought this could be a turning point game for Virginia football. And it felt like it might be a turning point game. It ended up being a turning point game. Virginia's record since that game, 63-93. Before that game, the 156 games they played before that, 99-57. So it's amazing what can happen. It's amazing what can happen, Scott. That game that night, that in that environment, that we laid an egg that night, and it's really had an impact for 14 years since. Do you remember that game, that 2004 game?
I do, not too accurately, but I do remember it, and you're right. That may have been the unraveling of the program. Am I going down the right road with it? As the older I get, the harder it is to remember things like that. But
I think that's what I'm thinking. That was a game that Virginia had in every respect.
Yes.
I mean, they gave up there was a Roscoe Parrish returned a punt for a touchdown. Miami missed a field goal, but was granted a timeout before the missed field goal and got a touchdown on the fourth. And when they decided to go for it on fourth down, I mean, there were some weird things that happened in that game. But that was the year. So that you'll remember this part. Virginia lost that game. Of course, they lost to Virginia Tech because they always lose to Virginia Tech. Went to that Boise Bowl, played for Fresno State on the blue turf. Blew that. Had a big lead in that one. Blew that game. And then from that point on, we've played 12 full seasons of football. This being the 13th season since then. We played 12 full seasons of football and had 3 winning seasons. And I ran the numbers on this, Scott. The 12 seasons previous to that, we had just 1 losing season. That was Alvaro's first season, actually. And we averaged 8 wins a season. So, I mean, when you talk about turning points, and I don't know that I left the stadium that night thinking turning point game. I thought for that season it was certainly a turning point game. But, man, that was 14 years ago, and we've not been back to that level since.
No, we haven't. We've been we haven't even flirted with it.
No.
That's the sad thing. We haven't even flirted with that. We haven't even had a cup of coffee with being able to be reasonably well respected. And I was at that humanitarian bowl game in Boise, Idaho. Actually, it was a pretty good bowl game. I can tell you, it was better weather there that day in Boise, Idaho than it was in Annapolis last January or last December. But much better. It was balmy compared to what we stepped through. But along and to throw, I guess, to throw some salt on the wound, and if we're talking a little bit more specific or generic about UVA football and where we are, why we find ourselves where we are now. Along with that, it's the infamous wisdom of someone or someones to do reseating.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, groups of people that were sitting together for years and years and years were told you can't sit here unless you double your alumni base, double your annual Virginia Athletics Foundation contribution. And a lot of people that had reasonably good seats were bounced into the upper deck or into the end zone, and they were split apart from their friends. And a lot of those, I know this for a fact because I used to upset with many of those folks. They haven't been back. And they picked a bad time to have an increase in the cost to watch your product. They picked a very bad time to do that. So that coupled with just, very poor a very poor product on the field, coaching changes. Since Grow, we've been through Grow with Mike London, now we're on Bronco Mendenhall. The verdict is still very much out on Bronco. Maybe we're crazy to be thinking 50,000 for Saturday night.
Yeah, we might be wishful thinking, to say the least, as far as that goes. But the game itself deserves it. And let's talk a little bit about the game. I broke these two teams down yesterday, and so I want to throw some things out, Scott, and get your thoughts too, because I know you've been looking these two teams over, certainly our Virginia team. Miami last week had to rally to beat Florida State, a pretty bad Florida State team, 28-27, but they won the game, and that's to their credit. We still don't know, I don't think, a lot about this Miami team. They've only played two decent opponents, one LSU, a very good opponent, and Florida State being the decent one. They played Savannah State, they played Toledo, and I can't think who the other, North Carolina, and beat those teams handily. They got blown out by LSU, and they barely beat FSU. I still look back at last season, in our game against them last season. Virginia led that game 28-14 at one point before Miami came back and won the game. But then the next week, Miami loses at Pitt. Pitt didn't even make a bowl last year. Then they got blown out by Clemson, lost in their bowl game by 10 points to Wisconsin. And then you start looking back at the rest of last season for Miami, Scott. And here's what I've come to the conclusion of. Miami was 10-0 at one point, number 2 in the country at one point. But they beat Georgia Tech on a last-second field goal in a monsoon. Georgia Tech didn't go to a bowl last year. They beat Syracuse by one score. Syracuse was 4-8 last year. They beat North Carolina in a one-score game. Carolina was 3-9 last year. They beat Florida State in the last 20 seconds. Florida State was 7-6 last year. Their whole season comes down really to two games. They did impressively beat Virginia Tech 28-10. The very next week, they blew out Notre Dame 41-8. Those two games were played at home, and a number of those other games I talked about were road games. They're really good at home. They're not so good on the road, and guess what? They're on the road this week. So I wonder which Miami team shows up, and are they vulnerable to what Virginia might be able to do them Saturday night?
Yeah, you talked about, we don't really know, even though it's not early in the season. You can't say we're still early in the season. We're moving close to the midway point of the season. For a lot of teams, they've already reached the midway point. But still, verdict's out on Miami. I'd say their two losses were to a decent, maybe a slightly better decent LSU team, and a horrible Florida State team. And that they had to rally to beat. This is not a good. Other than the fact they've got FSU on their jerseys and the colors and the tomahawk chalk, this is not an FSU team like we've ever seen before. Now, this is a bottom dwelling type team. So we don't know a lot about Miami. And conversely, we still don't know a lot about Virginia. I think we're going to really start to find out about the Cavaliers this weekend, because I believe that this is the best team we have faced this season. Unfortunately, again, I don't know about the home field advantage. That's what we talked about earlier. That's why this is such an important game. If the fans come out, get in there, support the team. I get so tired of seeing the team warm up and in front of not a half-empty stadium. They warm up in front of a 90% empty stadium. It's almost like a spring. You're playing in front of like a spring game crowd, a spring game Virginia type crowd. So, we should have the home field advantage should work to us Saturday night, but it's a lot of that's going to have to do with the fans and how loud the fans are in the student section. And hopefully, we will have the home field advantage, and that might be enough. That might be enough if we play well, avoid some turnovers, and of course, again, keep that injury keep that away. Don't have any key injuries.
Yeah, I'll go through some keys to the game, and turnovers were a big part of that. We all know and hate the turnover chain. I said this yesterday, Scott. I hate the turnover chain. I hate the lunch pail. I hate those gimmicky things that teams bring out. And this turnover chain, it's Miami. It is what they do. They're gaudy. They're flashy. They're whatever they are. But here's the thing: behind that turnover chain, it's something that works for that program in a sense. This year, it's not as pronounced, at least when you look at the one stat, turnovers forced versus turnovers you lose. Miami has forced 16 turnovers. They've committed 9. So that's not a big advantage in one sense. But here's where it's different. You look at points off turnovers. And not a lot of programs actually have this stat in their array of stats that you can look at their website, but Miami does for this reason. They've outscored opponents this year 69-16 in points off turnovers. They're averaging 11 points a game off turnovers from their opponents, and a 9-point margin per game in their favor. So, they may not win the turnover battle by a lot. I guess they're averaging about 1 turnover more per game forced over their opponents. But they get those turnovers in obviously advantageous places. It kind of reminds me of Virginia Tech when Virginia Tech under Beamer in the Beamer ball era would create short fields for their offenses with turnovers and the punt blocks and good punt returns and kickoff returns. And you'd look at the end of the day and say, well, gosh, Tech only gained 300 yards, but they scored 50 points. How do they do that? Well, they're only having to drive at 30 or 40 yards because of what their defense and special teams do. Miami does that too. And you look at Miami's stats offensively, they average 401 yards a game, but that's a bit of a misleading stat. They've played all those weak opponents in their 2 games against LSU and Florida State. They've averaged under 300 yards a game, so it's different for them when they play the good opponents. But they still create points off turnovers, and that's a big thing for them. So yeah, you said it, Scott. Avoid turnovers. Unfortunately for us, we're coming off our worst game offensively on the season, not just points wise. We scored less against Indiana, but the 2 turnovers for Bryce Perkins, that's got me concerned. That this Miami team. They're sharks in the water, man. They're gonna be looking to create those opportunities, and when they get them, they punch them in.
Yeah, and here's moving forward from that point. Looking back again to the NC State game, some turnovers. State had a good game plan for combating Perkins' run game. Which makes me wonder how are we going to, the cat and mouse game. It's like baseball. Pitchers learn a book on hitters. It's up to the hitters to kind of make adjustments in their swings, and it goes back and forth. I was not at all pleased with the offense, with the play calling, some of the play call selection. I'm normally not that critical of that because, first of all, I'm not a coach. I haven't spent years and years studying those things, and I find it very difficult to criticize someone that's their profession. But I was a little disappointed in the play calling on Saturday, especially some third down calls that we needed to do the ball just 3 or 4 yards for a first down, and we went for it all with passes into the end zone, things like that. I'm a little curious as to how well we adjust from the defensive schemes that we saw against State. Because Miami, I'm sure, is going to be probably very much on that same page because, Miami's second at their speed, defensive speed, is better than State. So this is going to be interesting to see how well Virginia adjusts to that and what kind of creative play calling we can expect from our coordinator on Saturday. He's getting a little heat, a little bit of heat from the fan base, from the message boards about his play calling, and maybe it's time that Mendenhall made a change there, which is not going to happen at least during the season. But what do you think about his, first of all, the play selection, offensive selection in the State game, and do you think what I'm saying is it's got to be a little creativity come Saturday against Miami?
One, the message board people are idiots, and those who are listening who are offended me saying that, sorry, but Ane knows what he's doing. He's been coaching for a while. The the message board folks, I guess that's what message boards do. It was vanilla. The thing you have to caution is we don't know what issues there may have been going into that game health wise for some guys. We were all critical leaving the stadium, for example, for good reason, the Military Bowl last year, because of the awful play call, and actually the season finale, regular season finale against Virginia Tech too, because the poor play calling in those games. And we found out later that it was just the lack of numbers on the offensive line, the lack of health on the offensive line. So I'm not saying that's an indication. I haven't thought that one through quite yet. And generally, coaches don't tell you that stuff like, oh yeah, our offensive line's all banged up, because they don't want the opponents to know that. So those kind of things are secrets until the season's over, and then it all comes out. But yeah, I mean, and here's the thing I'll say about it. Whatever the situation was, if it was just a bad day play calling for Anae, if it was bad execution, combination thereof, good game plan by NC State, which I always like to say, give the other side credit. They give out scholarships too, and State did a good job defensively. They're not last year's State defensive team, but they've hung their hats on defense for the last few years under Dave Doran. Virginia had a week with a bye week to look at that tape. And obviously, Miami's going to look at that tape and say, "Hey, what did State do? Let's see what we can do that State did." But Virginia had a week to look at that tape too and figure some things out. And so, I like Anae. I like what he does. I like that they found a quarterback in Bryce Perkins that fits what he does. Look at the NFL. If anybody watched the Monday night game. The New Orleans Saints, of course, what you would remember from that is Drew Brees breaking every record in the book, it seemed like that night. But Taysom Hill was interesting because you got Drew Brees breaking every record known to man in football. And Taysom Hill took how many snaps? 5-7 snaps at quarterback. Taysom Hill, we might not remember, but I remember, and I'm sure a few fans remember, was the quarterback at BYU. That was Broncos' last quarterback at BYU. And what was said all night long, the announcers couldn't stop talking about Taysom Hill. He's the fastest guy on the team. He's the toughest guy on the team. He lines up at tight end. He lines up at quarterback. Lines up at running back. Think about Bryce Perkins. I mean, that's exactly Taysom Hill's in the NFL. Taking some of the spotlight away from Drew Brees on a night when Drew Brees breaks all these records. We haven't had that level of quarterback until Bryce Perkins. And these guys found him. Anae found him. Mendenhall found him. I would say 5 games into the career, let's give him some slack. Perkins still has some room to grow. He played JUCO football last year, and I'm not saying he's going to have a great week against Miami this week. Miami is a top defense. They're the best defense in the ACC. Literally, they lead the ACC far and away in yards per game. But if I have to choose between Kurt Binkert and Bryce Perkins to lead me into the Miami game, I'll take Perkins 9 times out of 9, 10 times out of 10, a million times out of a million. He's the guy, and I like Anae and what he can do to get them ready. He's the best bet we've got.
Yeah, and I wasn't alluding to the fact that I was disappointed. I said that that's. Things don't go well. These people start pointing fingers at the coach and the quarterback coach. Now, Anae is a well-respected. I mean, he's been honing his craft for many, many years, and he's also a no-nonsense type guy. Calls it like he sees it. I wasn't real overly thrilled. That's a good term. Vanilla play calling against State for the most part. And I think what we probably don't want to face yet is that even though our depth is improving, it's still not anywhere near what it should be. So when you do have a depth issue and you're into the third quarter of games and you're putting second fielders out there, sometimes that limits. That playbook that might be 100 pages long. You got a bunch of second teamers, backups in there to give the first team guys some play, but you got to come up with a play. Maybe that 100-page playbook gets cut in half, maybe down to 50 or less. So he's still, to some degree, going to a gunfight with a water gun. Got a much more powerful water gun this year, but but he's still not competing quite even with a lot of his counterparts. And you made a comparison with Taysom Hill. Here's the big difference there. Yeah, I think he's going to be a good NFL quarterback, but with New Orleans, he's the backup. So they put him out there and run him all over the kamikaze type play. They can afford for him to get, a pickup if they would want that. No one would, but I'm saying he's the backup in New Orleans. UVA can ill afford to put Perkins out there in harm's way and just have him running, every single play. You got to protect him to a degree because, we think we got a good backup. We don't have a proven backup yet. We've seen glimpses of what our backup is going to have for sure. And you got to protect Perkins, and you can't have him now as the season progresses. I don't think you want him out there rushing the ball 25 times a game.
Well, I would agree in some sense, but then I would say, the offense works best. That offense is designed to work with that guy, not necessarily running 25 times a game, but 12 to 15 times a game. And if he needs to run it more, one thing I think that has impressed me about Perkins, and hopefully I'm not wrong on this, like he goes kamikaze on a play this weekend and gets hurt, but what he does well, I think it seems to me, is he takes hits the right way. If there's a way to put that. Barry Sanders had this art, and I'm not saying Bryce Perkins is Barry Sanders, but now Perkins' brother Paul is an NFL running back, played at UCLA in the NFL now, and so there's a right way to take a hit and a wrong way to take a hit. The NFL films things always would highlight the guy who ran through a guy. Earl Campbell used to run over guys. Well, Earl Campbell can't walk now in his 50s. He can't walk after running through guys for 10 years. Barry Sanders was so good at, you're going to get tackled eventually. I mean, you'll score your touchdowns, but eventually you get tackled. But don't take the direct hit. Don't take the direct hit on your leg. Don't take a direct hit on your shoulder. Don't take a direct hit on your head. Take glancing blows. Fall down when you need to. You don't have to be the toughest guy on the field. Be the smartest guy on the field. And what I've seen from Perkins so far is a guy who knows his limitations in that sense. And he doesn't have a lot. He's a fast guy. He's the fastest guy on the field most of the time. But he knows, hey, me fighting for an extra yard here on this particular play is not going to help my team out if I get hurt. Brennan Armstrong's a good backup quarterback, but he's a true freshman. So I think he's done a good job with that. And he needs to, because in that offense, you need that guy. You need that quarterback in an A's offense to be able to run 12 to 15 times a game consistently, maybe gain between 60, 80 yards, maybe break one off every once in a while. But he's got to be able to do that because otherwise the whole thing breaks down. But I think he's been really good at that for the most part this season.
Yeah, I heard a good analogy on a college game I was listening to on the way home from somewhere last Saturday night, or maybe a couple Saturday nights ago. The quarterback slid when he needed to. And the analogy was he knows when to be Clark Kent and not Superman.
Yeah.
So the same analogy to Perkins. I've watched that, and you're right. Oh my gosh, don't try to get that extra yard because there's a brick wall waiting for you. And he's slid and he's gotten out of harm's way. But human nature being what it is, we just hope there's not that one play that he thinks he needs another 2 yards or 3 yards to get that ball in field position or pick up a critical first down. You got to be careful because again, we're not the program is not at that level yet where we can just move the next guy up, have that next man up mentality because we're not there yet. We may not be there for another couple of years of decent recruiting.
Yeah. The numbers aren't there yet. That's exactly right. So it's kind of like Robert Griffin III. He got hurt his rookie year. I was going to say freshman year. His rookie year in the NFL, trying to run through Ray Lewis. Hey, on the one hand, I admire that you think you can do that, but Ray Lewis is in the Hall of Fame for a reason, and it's not because he let guys like Robert Griffin III run through him. So discretion, better part of valor. Let me say, too, the diatribe I had about the idiots on the message boards is as much about, I was scanning through, I do this a couple times a week. I'll look through, I want to see what people are saying, and I know sometimes it's stupid and everything else. And this is completely off topic, but I got to say at this stage, there was this lengthy set of messages about Sam Blum, the reporter from the Progress, who left to go. He's going to go cover Auburn now, and all these people with these horrible comments about this guy. Now I don't know the kid. I didn't never know the kid. I spoke to him once. He seemed like a quiet enough guy. Whatever. You know what? These folks, and it's unfortunately a lot of people, a lot of those little CB handles that people use on these message boards that you see all the time, saying these vile things about this kid. He's a kid out of college making $20,000 a year writing about football. He's not raping people. He's not doing all these. Leave, just whatever. He moved on. He's got a job. He's covering Auburn. Good for him. He's covering a good football team. I really, what it made me when I read every one of these messages, because it's so depressing, because I write stories for this fan base. We do these podcasts for this fan base. And sometimes I look at this stuff, Scott, and I say, what am I even doing? Because so many of these people are absolutely vile. It disgusts me. And if what I do is to entertain these people or inform these people, I don't want to do it anymore. So I say that, and I hope that somebody's listening. I hope somebody puts a stupid message on a message board for me saying this and says, well, Chris Graham said this. You know what? F you too. I don't even know that Blum kid. He's not anybody that I even care about, except for the fact that all these people out there who think they know what we do. They say bad things about me. Some of these people say bad things about Jerry Ratcliffe or Jeff White or Doug Dowdy or anything else. You know what? We're just all guys who, fortunately for us, we get to cover games, interview coaches and players. It's fun to do. None of us are getting rich at it. And if you can't accept that, then move on. Find something else to do with your life. Okay, Scott, diatribe over. Sorry for that.
Well, and I do read it, but for comical relief, because here's the bottom line, and this comes from a very knowledgeable person about message boards, and he shall forever remain anonymous. Probably half of those posters have never attended a game in person. Can you believe that? Half. And again, this is not a statistic I made up. This is from someone that knows the demographics. And unless you are at least going to the games and watching the games and following the team regularly, your opinion really isn't that much of value. I did not know Sam. I knew someone that did know him, and they spoke well of him. I think maybe the situation for Sam is he wasn't Santa Claus in his writings. He was critical when he needed to be. And the other factor is maybe we've always talked about sometimes it's not good to be the man that replaces the man. And Jerry's the beat writer for UVA football, basketball for many years. No one's going to beat Jerry. In fact, Jerry's even fallen out of grace a lot now because the demographics of the readership is a little different now. It's starting to trend a little younger, and a lot of people don't really know. But to be critical of someone like that, and I don't know if that was a factor in him deciding to leave Charlottesville, other than maybe it's certainly it's a step up in the quality of program going from Virginia to Auburn.
Well, from a football perspective, overall perspective,
Alabama.
Yeah,
but they have no business of being critical of him and condescending of his personality and his character. That's pretty poor.
He wrote stories. I mean, and all these personal aspersions, and I guess I'm upset because the same kind of things are said about me sometimes, and that's okay. I'm a big boy. I defend myself. I'm defending myself right now. I'll say it. Anybody wants to rumble, I'll rumble, and I'm not just saying that. Okay, I am just kind of saying that, but I will debate anybody to the end of the day, and if anybody who's had either the fortune or misfortune, as the case may be, to try to out debate me. I don't need a lot of sleep, so I'll win by filibuster if I have to. So that's fine. But It's just the personal aspersions that people cast. Uh, I don't know anybody who gets in the news business, sports business, whatever else. One, we're not getting rich at this. The people at the very top levels maybe make good money. The guys who are analysts on Fox and ESPN and CBS and all that stuff, some of them make really good money. Most of them are happy with their lives, make decent money, and get to do a lot of fun stuff. But there's a lot of travel, there's a lot of grind, there's daily deadlines, etc. that people who work 9-to-5 jobs may not quite be able to identify with. But we're not bad people, and if you think that's the case, then you need to examine yourself and why you're a sports fan. And there are some people actually who work on our side of the fence too who kind of bother me, and I'll just say it out loud. I don't care. The streaking the lawn people. They're perpetuating this thing against this Blum kid. And now they're all people, as far as I know. I don't know any of them are actually paid people. Maybe they are. Maybe I'll get corrected on this. I don't know that they're paid people. That's fine if they're not. We don't make a lot of money at this either. Scott volunteers here. We do all these fun things together. But if you're a volunteer person out there, then don't be throwing a net out there at somebody who's making a little bit of money doing what he's doing. He's not making a lot. Nobody I know who works who covers these games for UVA is making $50,000 a year. Think about that, people. Think about that. There's nobody there. There's no ESPN millionaires there who cover your team for you, who spend who wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, to thinking about finding out more information about the football team, the basketball team, the baseball team, the other teams there, and trying to find it, get it to you, and let you know what's going on. They're not getting rich off this. They're not doing well at all. Their jobs are getting cut every day, literally. Jerry, a great example of that. Jerry Ratcliffe, a great example of that, having to fend for himself now with his own website. And so, why can't we just have fun with this stuff? It should be fun, and I'd say the same thing now. I guess Robert Anae, he makes $400,000 a year. I think that's what his last salary figure was that I saw. We can criticize him. He's making good money. We can criticize his play calling. We can criticize his decisions on recruiting and stuff like that. He's making decent money at this. But leave the reporters alone. Even Doug Dowdy with that horrible thing he said at the NCAA tournament last year when he asked Ty Jerome if he knew that was the first time a 1 had lost to a 16. At least setting the bar for the dumbest question of the year. Even Doug is innocent. He might have a thick skull sometimes, but he's innocent. He knows he's a smart guy. He's a UVA grad, so But anyway, I don't know, Scott. I wonder sometimes if I'm just wasting my time. We're just wasting our time because I don't know if sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it in a sense.
Well, and I know for a fact personally, and I know you well enough to know that UVA sports in general is a big part of our lives, but it by no means whatsoever defines either one of our lives. We have multiple interests outside of sports, and I'm wondering about these message board guys, if that's all they have. Real quick, I was, sometimes you just have to step back and put sports in perspective because it's not like it's fun. It's a game. I followed, of course, live and die with the Orioles, and they had a managerial change as expected. They decided not to go any further with Buck Showalter, and he's a stand-up guy. He'll get another job if he wants another job managing. But in his press conference that he didn't have to do after not being retained, he did have a press conference, and one of the early questions presented to him was, how are you handling today, Buck? This probably has to be a very difficult day for you. And Buck, for those of you that watch Buck, he's got some very distinctive facial gestures, and he cocked his head, and he was like, huh? A very difficult day for me? You got to be kidding. He goes, we're in the shadow of the Johns Hopkins University. I do a lot of volunteer work. He said there's parents that facing their children having incurable cancer, facing major brain surgeries. That's a pretty difficult day.
Yeah.
This isn't a very difficult day for me. It's a sad day because it ends a chapter in my life. But as far as being very difficult, it's not a very difficult day because when I leave here, I'm going to go have a nice crab dinner. You got to put, and that's kind of, just putting real life ahead of sports, and if that looks to trigger, running some 21-year-old, 22-year-old out of town possibly because of all the criticism, then I think that's a sad commentary on what your life is.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened, and I wish him the best. He's covering Auburn football. Good luck there, too, as far as that goes. I'm sure those fans, maybe UVA was good practice, but those fans are going to be intense as well. So let's bring it back to football to finish this one out here. We've kind of analyzed the game. We talked a lot around it, too. Scott, I'll get your thoughts first on the game. I've already written my column, so spoiler alert, if you listen to this, haven't read the column yet, you'll hear what I have to say about the game as far as that goes. But your thoughts on the game and who wins and what's the score?
I think that Virginia's going to come out ready to play. I'm again encouraged. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic that we're going to have a really good crowd. I don't know if we're going to break 50,000, but high 40s at least. And an enthusiastic, loud crowd. I think if we can avoid major turnovers, keep everybody upright, especially our QB. I'd say this. I have a good feeling about Saturday night. I think this is going to be a very defining moment in Bronco Mendenhall's career, and I'm going to go with Virginia 27, Miami 24.
Okay. I want to kick both teams in the shins here a little bit. I guess that's what I do. Miami first, and this has nothing to do with their team, but it's going to be chilly Saturday night. And when I say chilly, I mean for us here, because we've had a late in the summer, if you want to say this week, the last week or 10 days, we've had 80 to 85 to 9-degree temperatures. Even today with rain, as we're recording this on Wednesday, it's still mid-70s, humid as heck. It's going to be, I think, game time temperature in the low 50s. By 8 o'clock, it's going to be in the mid-40s. I mean, it's going to be chilly for us. They're coming from the surface of the sun. They get on a plane on Friday morning. It's going to be 1,000,000 degrees with a 10 million% humidity. And they're going to get off that plane. It's going to be shockingly chilly weather. So that's a factor that's going to help Virginia. I still think Miami is a bit of a fraud. I think that 10 wins last season was 2 wins over Notre Dame and Virginia Tech and a bunch of lucky wins, including the win over Virginia. Very, very fortunate. Breaks happened their way, etc. They're 5-1 this season. Still don't think that there's much to look at there, and maybe there will be Saturday night, but we haven't seen much of this team this year that gives me any reason for confidence. Now it's the turn to kick Virginia in the shins. I'm worried about Bryce Perkins. I'm worried about that vanilla play calling we talked about in the loss. Either it was just bad play calling or they were masking something that we don't know about, but I'm concerned about the offense for Virginia. I'm concerned about the defense, too. Miami runs for 194 yards a game. Virginia, we know, is most susceptible to the run to a point where NC State ran on us. NC State was running for 107 yards per game. They ran for 178 in that win over us last 2 weeks ago. So I'm concerned about the ability. Jordan Mack was a bigger loss than we know he's a good athlete, but he's a bigger loss than we even thought, and we thought he was going to be a big loss going in. So I'm concerned about the defense. So I'm concerned about the offense, concerned about the defense. I think Miami's a fraud. It's going to be bad weather for them. I put all that into a hat, and I come up with Miami 20, Virginia 14. I think this is going to be a game, Scott, that comes down to a one-score game. And when I say 20-14, I mean, obviously, if we can avoid the turnovers, if we can slow their running game down or stop their running game, if Bryce Perkins can get some stuff going, it's possibly a Virginia win. I think that it's a game that either team can win. I just think Miami probably pulls it away, and maybe it's the negative UVA fan in me that says that because I had my hopes high in the NC State game. They kind of got dashed, but I think it's going to be a tight game in the fourth quarter. I hope our guys come out on top, but I think Miami probably will. So, spoiler, there we go. I think Miami comes away with the win, but I like your scenario better.
Well, and I hope that playing in Siberia will be the deciding factor for Miami. And they have gone to Miami. I mean, Miami. I don't know. I don't know if that high into the weather. Now, if it was going to be 0-degree night, maybe that would affect us as well. But a lot of these players have played in Blacksburg in November, so in essence, they have played in Siberia. So weather is going to be that big a factor. I think if Virginia wins, it's going to be because we played the better game, avoided turnovers, kept everyone healthy, and Perkins has a solid game in rushing and passing.
Yeah, they've played in Blacksburg, but they haven't played there in a couple of years, and it's going to be a factor. But Perkins needs to have a good game passing and moving the ball with his feet to help clear the game for the run game for Jordan Ellis. And we need to figure out who in the middle of the front seven can slow the running game down. Maybe we didn't do it against State, so there are question marks out there. And now, so I'll close my part of this with this. I talked a lot about that 2004 game, what turned into a turning point in a negative direction game for Virginia, losing to Miami at home on a Saturday night. I bring all that up to say, I hope that this is a turning point in that other direction. And I think you said it, Scott. This could be a defining win for Bronco Mendenhall. Virginia's played Miami well. The Mike London era, even as bad as the Mike London era was, we played Miami well in the Mike London era. That's a program we played well over the years. It's out there. It's hanging out there. Virginia's got a chance in this game. And honestly, at this stage, I think that's all you can really ask for is Virginia to have a chance.
That's right. That's to me, that's progress because a year or so ago we wouldn't have much reason to be optimistic.
That's right. Well, I think that'll be a good way to sign it off. Sorry for the negativity in the middle there, but I can't accept running a kid off like that the way our fan base did. So anyway, hopefully we've reproached those folks. For Scott German, I'm Chris Graham. Now we'll be, of course, at Scott Stadium Saturday night. And we'll have the live vlog. We'll do the post-game stuff, everything we normally do on a home game. And so please join us on Saturday on AugustaFreePress.com. Signing off, I'm Chris Graham. Wahoo wah.